ever feel like you're drowning in projects? You know, the kind that start off simple enough, but then, bam, they balloon into these massive, unwieldy beasts.
Oh, tell me about it. It's a tale as old as time. But what if I told you there's a way to tame those project management monsters?
Okay, now you've got my attention. Spill the tea. What's the secret weapon?
Well, let's just say today's deep dive is taking us straight into the heart of the Scrum Guide.
Scrum Guide? Sounds kind of sporty for a project management framework.
Well, it's more about teamwork and agility than, actual scrums. Think of it as a playbook for navigating complex projects without getting bogged down in rigid rules and endless meetings.
Okay, so less bureaucracy, more getting things done. I can get behind that. But how does this whole Scrum thing actually work?
At its core, Scrum is all about breaking down those huge, daunting projects into smaller, more manageable chunks called sprints.
Sprints, like short bursts of intense work.
Exactly. Instead of trying to plan everything up front, which, let's face it, rarely works perfectly, you focus on delivering value in these time-boxed iterations, usually no more than a month long.
So it's about making continuous progress and getting stuff out there, rather than waiting months for a big reveal, only to realize it's not what anyone wanted.
Now you're getting it. And who better to guide us on this journey than the creators themselves, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland? They literally wrote the book on Scrum.
All right, so we've got our sprints, but a project is only as good as the team behind it, right?
Couldn't agree more. And Scrum really emphasizes teamwork. We're talking about a collaborative effort here, not a bunch of lone wolves.
No lone wolves allowed. I like the sound of that.
Right.
So who are the key players on this Scrum team?
Well, according to the Scrum Guide, you've got three main roles.
Yeah.
Developers, the product owner, and the Scrum Master.
Okay, developers, I get it. But when they say developers, are we talking just software engineers or...
That's a common misconception. Developers in Scrum refers to anyone involved in actually creating the product.
Yeah.
It could be designers, writers, marketers, you name it.
Got it. So if you're contributing to the project, you're part of the development team. What about the product owner? Are they like the boss calling all the shots?
They're more like the voice of the customer. Their job is to make sure the team is building the right product, the one that truly solves the user's problems and delivers that sweet, sweet value.
So they're the ones keeping the project laser focused on the why behind all the work. Important job.
Absolutely. And they do that by managing something called the Product Backlog. Think of it as a prioritized wish list of all the features and improvements they envision for the product.
A wish list, you say. Sounds dangerous, like it could turn into a chaotic free-for-all of ideas.
And that's where the Scrum Master swoops in to save the day. Think of them as the guardian of the Scrum process, making sure the team stays on track and doesn't get bogged down by distractions.
So they're like the conductor of an orchestra, ensuring everyone's in sync and hitting the right notes.
Exactly. They're all about facilitating collaboration, removing roadblocks, and fostering that all-important open communication within the team.
Okay, this is all making sense. We've got our team, our sprints, and our prioritized wish list of features. But where do those core Scrum values come into play?
You see, Scrum is more than just checking boxes on a to-do list. It's about creating a work environment where those values, things like commitment, focus, openness, respect, and even courage, can thrive.
Those are some pretty powerful words. How do they translate into real-world actions? Give me an example.
Okay, imagine this. You're in the middle of a sprint, and suddenly, bam, a major roadblock pops up. Maybe it's a technical issue or a dependency on another team falls through.
Oh, I've been there. It's not pretty. So what happens? Does everyone panic?
Not in a Scrum team. Remember those values we talked about? Openness is key here. Instead of sweeping the problem under the rug, the team acknowledges it, discusses it openly, and collaborates to find a solution.
So transparency is king. Everyone's aware of what's happening, which allows for quicker problem solving and adaptation. This deep dive is already paying off.
It all boils down to building trust and empowering the team to be open about challenges. Because, let's face it, challenges are inevitable in any project, but it's how you handle them that makes all the difference.
This is fascinating stuff. But before we get too deep into problem solving, I'm curious about the nuts and bolts of how these sprints actually unfold.
Well, that's where the beauty of Scrum events comes in. They provide that framework for regular inspection and adaptation, ensuring the project stays aligned with its goals. But we'll dive into those in our next part.
All right, so last time we dove into the who's who of Scrum, those key players on the Scrum team, and got a feel for the overall vibe, which, spoiler alert, is all about collaboration and transparency. But how do we actually kick things off? Where does the rubber meet the road in a sprint?
Well, picture this. It's the start of a brand new sprint, and the team gathers, not for a coffee break, but for a focused session of strategizing and planning. This, my friend, is the sprint planning event.
Okay, so no panic scrambling just yet. We're starting off organized. I like it.
Exactly. Sprint planning is all about setting the stage for success. The team comes together to decide what they can realistically achieve during the upcoming sprint. We're talking about setting clear goals, and, well, it involves a bit of a wish list, too.
A wish list, you say. Now, this is where I get a little skeptical. Don't get me wrong, I love a good wish list, but in a project, doesn't that just lead to, feature creep and scope explosion?
And that's where the art of prioritization comes in. Remember, the product owner, well, they're the keepers of the product backlog, that prioritized wish list of features and improvements. During sprint planning, they highlight which items on that list are most crucial for achieving the overall product goal.
Right, the product goal, that North Star that keeps everyone moving in the right direction.
Exactly. So the product owner sets the stage, and then the developers jump in. They roll up their sleeves and start figuring out how to turn those wish list items into reality.
Okay, so less wishing, more doing. I can dig it. Walk me through that process.
The developers take those selected items from the product backlog and break them down into smaller, more actionable tasks. Who's doing what? How long will it take? Are there any dependencies? All that good stuff. And this, my friend, becomes their sprint backlog.
So the sprint backlog is like a detailed roadmap for the next 2 weeks, a slice of that larger product backlog pie.
A delicious analogy. But here's the thing. Even with the detailed plan, things change. Unexpected challenges pop up. New information comes to light. That's just the nature of complex projects.
Right, because no plan survives contact with reality, right? So how does Scrum handle those inevitable curveballs?
Well, remember how we talked about Scrum embracing change? That's where daily check-ins come in handy.
Daily? Wow, Scrum doesn't mess around. Tell me more about these daily Scrums.
Think of them as quick huddles, no longer than 15 minutes, ideally held at the same time each day. It's a chance for the developers to sync up, share progress, and address any roadblocks.
So it's like a quick pulse check, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Precisely. And to keep things efficient, each developer answers just 3 key questions. What did I do yesterday? What will I do today? And are there any obstacles in my way?
Short, sweet, and to the point. I can see how that would keep things moving.
It's all about maintaining momentum and fostering that proactive, problem-solving mindset. By addressing challenges head-on, you avoid those last-minute scrambles that can derail a project.
So we're planning, we're checking in daily, but at some point we need to actually see the results, right?
Absolutely. That's where the sprint review comes in, a moment to showcase the increment, that potentially shippable product increment that the team has been working on.
Time to roll out the red carpet.
You bet. It's an opportunity to gather feedback from stakeholders, get their input on what's been built so far, and make sure everyone's still on the same page.
So it's not just about showing off, it's about incorporating valuable outside perspective and making course corrections as needed.
Now you're thinking like a true Scrum Master. The feedback gathered during the sprint review is like gold. It feeds directly back into the product backlog, informing future sprints and ensuring you're always building something valuable.
It's like this beautiful loop of feedback and continuous improvement. But before we move on to the final event in the sprint cycle, there's one thing I'm curious about. Is there also a dedicated time for the team to, step back, take a breath, and reflect on their process?
You read my mind. That's precisely what the sprint retrospective is all about. Hitting the pause button and figuring out how to be even more awesome in the next sprint.
So it's not just about celebrating successes, but also acknowledging areas for improvement, right?
Exactly. It's a safe space, a blameless zone, where the team can openly discuss what worked, what didn't, and what they can do differently next time.
All right, we've covered the who's who and the what's what of Scrum, got our team, our sprints, our events, a whole lot of collaboration happening. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'm kind of curious about the why behind it all. Like, what are the driving forces, the guiding principles that make this whole framework tick?
Excellent question. You're hitting at the heart of Scrum. It's more than just a set of rules. It's a whole mindset.
A Scrum mindset. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Imagine a team that's not afraid of change. A team that's empowered to make decisions, learn from their experiences, and, get this, continuously adapt their approach as they go. That's Scrum in action.
Sounds kind of like a dream team, to be honest. But how do they actually pull it off? What's the magic formula?
Well, there's no magic formula, but there are 3 core principles that underpin everything in Scrum: empiricism, iterative progress, and self-managing teams.
Okay, those sound a tad technical. Mind breaking them down for me?
Sure thing. Let's start with empiricism. It's a fancy way of saying, look, we don't have all the answers up front, and that's perfectly fine.
Okay, I can get behind that. In the real world, things rarely go exactly according to plan.
Exactly. Scrum acknowledges that in complex projects, you can't predict every twist and turn. So instead of clinging to a rigid plan that's bound to go off the rails, you adapt as you go, learn from your mistakes, and adjust your course based on real-world feedback.
So it's all about embracing the unknown, being flexible, and learning as you go.
You got it. And that brings us to the second principle, iterative progress. Instead of aiming for one massive launch at the end, you deliver value in smaller increments, gather feedback along the way, and use that feedback to refine your approach. It's like taking small bites, chewing things over, and adjusting your taste buds as you go.
Now you're making me hungry. But I get the analogy. It's about making continuous progress and course correcting as needed.
Exactly. Now, the third principle, self-managing teams, that's all about empowering people to do their best work. Instead of micromanaging every little detail, Scrum teams are given the autonomy to figure out how they're going to reach their goals.
So more freedom, less hand-holding. I can see how that would be motivating for a team. But with all this freedom, how do you keep things from, completely veering off track?
Ah, great question. That's where the Scrum artifacts come in. Those tangible things that provide transparency and alignment throughout the project.
Right. We've touched on these before, but a little refresher never hurts. Remind me again, what are those artifacts?
You've got your trusty product backlog, that ever-evolving wish list of features, always there to guide the way. Then there's the sprint backlog, breaking down those selected wish list items into bite-sized tasks for the sprint. And finally, we have the definition of done.
Definition of done, that one always sounds so final, like there's no room for interpretation.
Don't let the name fool you. It's actually all about clarity and shared understanding. The definition of done outlines in detail what it means for a task to be truly, completely done. No more guesswork, no more ambiguity.
So it's like setting clear expectations from the get-go, making sure everyone's on the same page about what finished actually looks like.
Exactly. And that shared understanding is crucial for maintaining quality and avoiding those, oh, I thought it was done, moments down the line.
Makes sense. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. As we wrap things up, what's the key takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
At its core, Scrum is a framework for embracing change, for fostering collaboration, and for delivering value in a way that's adaptable and, dare I say, even enjoyable.
Enjoyable.
Yeah.
Now, that's a word you don't often hear associated with project management. But I have to say, after this deep dive, I'm starting to see the appeal. It's less about rigid rules and more about empowering teams to do their best work.
And that's what it's all about. The Scrum Guide provides a solid foundation, but the real magic happens when you take these principles and tailor them to your own unique context.
So true. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's all about finding what works for you and your team. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of Scrum. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and, more importantly, gained some valuable insights that you can put into practice. Until next time, keep those minds curious, those projects agile, and remember, sometimes the best way to conquer chaos is to embrace it.